Is your provider recommending a labor induction? If so, here is the best question to ask before consenting or refusing a labor induction. Ready for it? What is my Bishop score? Okay, I know. Bishop score, what the heck is that? Well, it's actually a super simple tool for calculating how likely it is that your body will have a successful induction. Let me break it down. If you're new here, hi, I'm Kelly, your online doula, educator, and #1 fangirl for all things birth. In this channel, I teach you how to avoid unnecessary medical interventions and how to feel ready and empowered for your birth. Before we dive in, if you are certain that you do not want a labor induction, I recommend that you watch my video, The #1 Way to Avoid a Labor Induction, before watching this video. Because if you know you don't want an induction, you might never even need to know what your Bishop score is. And so if you haven't yet, check this out. But if you're on the fence, this video is for you because knowing your Bishop score can help you determine when to schedule your labor induction, because that matters. What is a Bishop score? It's a tool that calculates 5 different measurements to determine how likely it is that your body will receive the induction and have a successful vaginal birth. The 5 measurements are cervical dilation, cervical effacement, baby's station, the consistency of the cervix, and the position of the cervix. Let's dive into each of these 5 measurements in a little more detail. So #1, cervical dilation. This is how open your cervix is. And so just to give you a little bit of a sense, a penny is 2 centimeters dilated. You have to be at a 10 before you can push your baby. And so the more dilated you are, the more likely it is that you would have a successful induction. The next step, cervical effacement. So how thin the cervix is. Before labor, the cervix is actually really long. And as you get closer to labor, it thins out and gets really short. The thinner or shorter your cervix is, the more likely it is that you would have a successful labor induction. The third measurement is fetal station. So this is how high or low your baby is in your uterus and through your pelvis. And it's broken down by stations: positive, 0, and negative station. The further down your baby is, the more likely it is that you would have a successful labor induction. The fourth measurement is cervical positioning. And so this is your cervix pointed towards the front or the back. The more your cervix is pointed towards the front, the more likely it is you'll have a successful labor induction. And the final measurement is cervical consistency, so how firm or soft your cervix is. And so a really firm cervix, a cervix that's not anywhere near labor or maybe not even pregnant at all, it feels like the tip of your nose. So go ahead and touch your nose here. That's a firm cervix. A soft cervix has the consistency of your lips. And so feeling your lips, that is a soft cervix. The softer your cervix is, the more likely it is you'll have a successful labor induction. And so to calculate your Bishop score, points are assigned for each of these 5 measurements. And then each of those points are added up to equal your Bishop score. If your score is higher than an 8, it is more likely that you would have a successful labor induction. If it's less than an 8, well, it's a little more complicated, and it's likely that you will need multiple interventions to be able to kickstart and then keep labor going. If your Bishop score is a 6 or less, you're going to need additional medication to first soften the cervix before we can even talk about any dilation. It's super easy to find a Bishop score calculator. You can simply Google it, or I've linked my favorite calculator in the description below. Let's play around with some scenarios so you can see how this actually would play out. Okay, so let's say you go in for a cervical exam and that you find out you're 2 centimeters dilated and 70% effaced. Your baby's at a -2 station, and your cervix is medium and hanging out in the middle there. Your Bishop score in this case would be a 6. In this case, your provider will likely recommend you have an intervention which will help further ripen your cervix. In this next example, let's say that you're actually dilated to a 3 this time. Still 70% effaced, baby in the same position, but your cervix is soft and, well, still in the middle. You can see that your Bishop score has jumped up to an 8, making you a candidate who's much more likely to have a vaginal birth after an induction without the help of additional interventions to soften your cervix. One of the limitations to the Bishop score is it doesn't account for previous births. And actually, in practice, if you've birthed vaginally before, the likelihood that you can birth vaginally again is very, very high. How could this play out in practice? So let's say your doctor is starting to recommend an induction and you are skeptical or you don't want to do that. One strategy is to ask your doctor, what is your Bishop score? And if you are lower than an 8, ask for some time before scheduling that induction. And instead, try some natural at-home methods for softening or ripening your cervix. I have a whole video about this, going over my top 5 methods for softening your cervix naturally at home. I've linked it right here and below.